Well, welcome everyone to this webinar. This is Eric Sweden here. I want to tell you all we're glad you're here. This webinar is sponsored by the NASCIO Enterprise Architecture and Governance Committee and Program. And we've got a great panel for you this afternoon. Mike Leahy is Secretary of Technology and Chief Information Officer for the state of Maryland. Mike is also one of our co-chairs on our Enterprise Architecture and Governance Committee. And then we have Alex Pettit. Dr. Alex Pettit is Chief Technology Officer for the state of Colorado and former Chief Information Officer for the states of Oregon and Oklahoma. We also have Libby Bacon, Principal with Deloitte Consulting, focusing on workforce. Libby, give a wave there so they know you. And then Bree Semmel is a Senior Manager in Deloitte's Government and Public Services practice. She specializes in workforce transformation services for CIOs, workforce analytics, and also transformation at roles, skills, organizational design, that type of thing. And that's going to be very relevant to this session. So just to let you all know, the audience is muted. Please use the chat box for questions. This webinar is being recorded. Slides in the recording will be available. So to touch things off here, again, thank you panelists for being here. We are so glad that you're taking time to speak to our NASCIO community. Really appreciate it. I will also give a special thank you to Ron Baldwin for working with me on this webinar. Ron Baldwin is a specialist executive with Deloitte, focusing on cloud and digital transformation. Ron is also the former CIO for the state of Montana. So let's get started with some polling questions. We're going to run 3 questions here, asking everybody to respond. And then we'll show the answers, and then we'll go to the next question. There's going to be a total of 3 questions. So here we are. What do you see as the likelihood you will continue in a virtual work environment? Give you a few seconds to respond to that question. Okay. Well then there now, look at this. Definitely will stay remote for foreseeable future. 68% most likely, 29% not likely, 4%. Well, that's interesting. Okay, let's go to the next one, Julie. Do you have a strategy in place for enabling effective teams given a remote working environment? Definitely, 82%. And then 14% were feeling the challenges. Now 5% were not ready. Actually, this is pretty impressive. Okay, Julie, let's go to the final question for our audience. Really appreciate these responses. Thank you so much. How important is moving to the cloud to support virtual work? Essential. Not, it helps, but isn't essential, 32%. Okay, well, all right. So let's go to the next slide there, Julie. Okay, so I wanted to bring in just a little bit of an intro here because I want to get to our speakers. But workforce has been an important priority for state CIOs for some time. In fact, we have made a point in past NASCIO publications related to the new CIO operating model. And we're going to look at one of the plays here in a bit. But our annual surveys have addressed workforce from our 2015 survey, we had looked at specifically workforce and asked some questions there, but I want to first look at this 2019 annual survey. The single personnel reform that could be implemented and would be most impactful in reforming your state IT workforce. Bree and Libby, I think you're going to find this very interesting too. So in 2017, when we asked that question, 31% responded, 33% in 2019, modernizing job titles and classifications. And then in 2019, we added this question, training and development to build new skills. Now I'm going to move to the next slide because our workforce survey from 2015 included this question: what skills and disciplines present the greatest challenges in attracting and retaining IT employees? Now look at this, security, number one. I don't think we're surprised by that. Application development, number two. That one is going to be relevant, I think, to this conversation. Architecture makes a lot of sense. Architecture remains even as we move into the new paradigm. And then business and intelligence, insight enabling analytics. So those are the top winners there. Mainframe legacy support, that's an interesting one. You know, how would that turn out today if we ask that question? Now, I think we're going to be running something like this next year, and we'll see what those answers are. But let's move on here. As part of the CIO as broker initiative or the new CIO operating model, play number 10 is all about preparing the workforce. You know, Doug Robinson talks about less rowing, more steering. And in fact, as we move into that paradigm, you know, we're going to have different kinds of skills, roles, and responsibilities. And that's where this play came from. But to start out here in getting into the presentation, I'd like Libby and Bree to give us an overview on what they're seeing relative to workforce, cloud, the type of work we'll be doing, where we will be doing it from. So Libby and Bree, I'm going to turn it over to you for the next few slides here, please.
All right, perfect. Thank you, Eric. And recognizing that Bree and I stand between you guys hearing from Michael and Alex, which I know is definitely top of mind. We'll keep this brief, but we did want to tee up the conversation a little bit just around what we are seeing in the market and as we are having conversations with our clients. So if you are looking at the slides, what we have done is we have responded to COVID is we, like good consultants, created a framework around respond, recover, and thrive. First off, I want to commend all of you because what we saw in that respond phase was the need to literally overnight move to a virtual environment that still supported the citizens and recipients across the country. And so really as CIOs and those that work within the technology shops of states, I think it is a remarkable accomplishment with the way that each of you responded as well as your teams responded in order to maintain service delivery and focus on the critical services that each of you support each day. We then saw it turn into, after the first, I would say, couple of months, this recover phase. And I think some would say we bounced back and forth between the respond and recover a little bit, but really starting to look at those changes in your work, in your workforce, as well as then, of course, the workplace, which I think we all recognize not all of us are used to working from home every day. But in this recovery phase, really starting to think about what does that mean to your landscape and what do you need to do? We are hopeful that what we will see ahead is a thrive stage. And when we talk about thriving, it's really taking the concepts. And I am glad to see that so many of you feel comfortable that you have the right environment and that you are able to effectively continue to operate in this virtual world. But it's really looking at how do we continue to promote resiliency and agility across your organization so that this disruption that all of us has faced is really a new opportunity to deliver anew. I don't know that any of us have ever lived through something quite so dramatic as this shift, but I think what we've also seen coming out is opportunities for improvement. And as you guys responded to the poll, the ability to use your cloud technology and the ability to deliver services differently are a huge opportunity. So being an eternal optimist, I will look at it that way. And I'm sure we're going to hear from Mike and Alex about how they have been able to lead their organizations in some of these areas. So we take this respond, recover, and then thrive framework, and then I'll say layer on top this concept of what we've called the future of work, which is what work will continue to be done both by humans as well as then by technology or machines. What does that mean to our workforce, and what are the implications across what we've said is an ecosystem of stakeholders? So not just your full-time employees, but your workforce at large, which is really a number of different stakeholders and partners, as well as then finally the workplace. And so that, of course, is the physical buildings, but now is much more than that. It really is the collaboration tools and the spaces that you are able to create in order to ensure collaboration and productivity. So in the next two slides, we're going to talk a little bit more about each of those fundamentals, the work, the workforce, as well as the workplace. So if we want to go ahead and flip to the work, or flip to the slide, and then you can see that on the left-hand side of the slide, we talk about what is the actual work that is getting done. And so what we've seen and what we hope to continue to see is an increased resilience and the ability to continue to use automation and cloud-based delivery to do the work differently. And I think that could look like process automation. We have seen the proliferation of chatbots, and really looking at how do we take a digital first mentality in order to engage with citizens and employees and ideally serve them better. And with that, it's going to provide those opportunities where the work itself that your organization is doing is slightly different than what was done 5 or 10 years ago. And I'm going to hand it to Bree to talk a little bit more about example and give some color around that concept of what it means for the work to be different.
Yeah, thanks, Libby. I just wanted to share, when COVID first kind of hit the world a few months ago, we actually were able to support a client in a large metropolitan area that serves about 3 million citizens. And one of the needs that they anticipated, which we expect to be kind of a growing demand from citizens, is that cross-county visibility around what they need most. So for this particular response, it was about, having visibility into mask availability, testing centers for COVID, ways that they could get access to meals or even to quarantine treatment or isolation facilities if they needed to be separate from their family. And the way that our client approached it was actually one that was enabled by cloud because their infrastructure was already in place. They were able to launch a centralized marketplace with, kind of an Amazon marketplace idea of you can find where counties have certain supplies, you can engage with them, there's automated notifications and that sort of thing. They were able to launch that across counties within 5 days. And that type of, rapid deployment is something that we think is going to become status quo as IT continues to mature and as data and even integrated data sets become really important for providing those on-demand or self-service services for citizens. I'll turn it back to you, Libby, for workforce.
Perfect. Thanks, Bree. And so then when we talk a little bit more about the workforce itself, and I think Eric is interesting, even as you highlighted some of the studies before from previous years, I think top of mind and one of the shifts that we are seeing probably most dramatically is this need to focus on reskilling, as well as what I've called here team management, which is really, if you think about how organizations were structured historically and what that looks like going forward. We are seeing a lot more agility and the need to focus teams around project-based iterations and then quickly reskill, pivot into a newly formed team. So whether you call it an adaptable organization or a network of teams, it's this concept of people are not getting trained up for one job that sits in on an organizational chart, and that job stays the same forever. It's really this concept around having more flexibility, which I tied back, on the survey that you presented around the need to simplify job classifications and IT skill sets, as well as the need to have training for your workforce. So that's definitely a biggie around workforce. Clearly then, virtual first mentality based upon the survey results. I think everyone is recognizing, whether it is Google, who just announced that they're actually looking to be virtual first, all the way through July of next year. But most organizations are certainly thinking telework will remain. And so then what does that mean to your culture, to your communication processes? I think we'll hear again from Alex and Mike a little bit more about what they've experienced and how do we go forward with the right types of performance management in place in order to be successful when walking the halls is no longer one of your performance management choices, right? By nature, it's a little harder to do that in this environment. And then finally, certainly we have seen diversity, equity, and inclusion come top of mind for agencies and organizations. And what does that mean, particularly as we look at the generational changes in our workforce and we see millennials and others joining? What does that mean when it comes to the composition of your workforce, as well as the conversations that people want to have? And so with that, I will flip it back to Bree. I think she's going to talk a little bit more on the reskilling front about an example from one of our projects.
Yeah, so I think I just wanted to highlight, we've talked even in the short 5 minutes here about the importance of cloud in the midst of modernization. And then even just before we started, we were saying, man, the workforce is even in some cases experiencing some burnout from working at home. And one of the clients I work with regularly has been on this journey about reskilling and looking at the workforce, not just from an employee perspective, but from an employee and contractor perspective, like we mentioned. And where they are in terms of this reskilling journey is they started to realize up front that they really needed to have some pretty critical roles up front that were more in-house than, some external entity that was going to advise them. So for instance, they were able to engage in this skills assessment that forecasted out the types of roles they would need as they transition from on-prem management to become a cloud services broker. And the roles that they were looking to define up front were ones that they didn't really have access to, things like cloud architects and cloud security architects for their planning phase. And the way that they approached that was they invested a lot of time into two more seasoned folks who knew their legacy systems and knew their mission, knew their customers' needs. And they partnered them with some architects, from industry to help define new enterprise standards that wouldn't compromise anything about service delivery that was crucial to them, but would help them kind of advance the needle in terms of getting to a spot where they could feel confident about their brokerage services. And as they progressed through that, they kind of overcame the initial architecture hurdle. And then as they started to grow their cloud footprint, they realized, okay, well, we really need in-house talent that's going to be able to manage the business side of cloud, which is something that had not been part of their service catalog in the past. So things like cloud business management and cloud tagging and having automated governance controls that were embedded in their CI/CD pipeline. Those were things that they wanted to make sure that they had employees focused on so that they could have some of those risks mitigated in an in-house fashion. And as of right now, they're moving forward to sort of fill some of those gaps through some targeted learning paths. So they're not just approaching it from, a web-based training perspective, but they're doing rotational programs so that as new pilots are stood up in a cloud environment, they're actually providing employees with high potential in those areas to get some hands-on experience, whether it is on the development side, the engineering side, and then on that cloud business management side as well. And the thing I would add, just to kind of punctuate this a little bit, they're kind of figuring out now that hybrid cloud management is more complex than they initially anticipated. So running in parallel, the on-prem and cloud infrastructures becomes more complex when you don't necessarily have the right talent that balances both. So having someone in that critical service delivery or cloud service delivery role is not necessarily enough. There's got to be some coordination between the on-prem experts, and that goes back to even the mainframe skills. Those don't just go away when you're transitioning to cloud, working in tandem together to make sure that the benefits of cloud are being translated into future capabilities, but the legacy infrastructure that is still running some of the nuts and bolts of your day-to-day have to be just as resilient in some cases as your cloud footprint. So in a few ways, reskilling is becoming top of mind, especially as attracting new talent, it becomes more and more difficult while IT organizations are competing for the same people.
So you've got some other information here on the changing workforce as well. So I want to get into that a little bit. And then this new normal.
Yep, absolutely. So interestingly enough, when we had this conversation around workforce, and workplace a year ago, candidly, workplace was the one that was probably ignored the most, or at least the least emphasized. And clearly we saw that change. And so each of you had to deal with both, how do I make my own workforce virtual, but then also the demands of agencies probably looking to you as far as how do we create more seamless delivery and have more mobility and self-service access. So workplace has become front and center. I think we are seeing that it is a work in process, but keeping top of mind security as well as sensing technology and really focusing on what is that demand for mobile as well as on-demand self-service access and virtual connectivity. I'm sure each of you is living day to day, which then takes us to the new normal, which I guess I would say, if anyone, we could all probably agree that the new normal is basically not normal. Because it is different, and I think it will continue to be different. But really, how, in your positions, can you use data to drive those decisions? So same old concepts, but certainly one that continues to be very important. And then thinking about, we've talked about how do you use cloud platforms to increase your resiliency, to provide that agility. And then, we didn't hit on this as much, but in this virtual environment, what does it mean for your employee well-being, and what does work look like on a day-to-day basis so that folks aren't burning out? And I think that's what we've heard recently from some of these articles around virtual is good for a lot of reasons, but there are some bumps in the road that we still need to work through and figure out. So hopefully that gives everyone some good food for thought and sets up the conversation. Eric, I can flip it back to you, and I know we can get into a series of Q&A if that sounds good.
That sounds great. I want to back up just to this slide and then ask Mike, as you listen to Libby and Bree, this whole concept of this triad, the work we do, the makeup of the workforce and the workplace, just want to get some of your reaction and perspective on that idea.
Well, I applaud you for the work you've done so far, and just want to add a couple of pieces in context, because one of the things Bree talked about went to the idea of getting folks in the old technology, on-prem mainframes, to work in sync with the new capabilities that they have because of better data utilization and the ability to move that data more succinctly and analyze it faster. The principal challenge that I see in any of that work is that the on-prem folks don't look at reinventing their process, but merely lifting and shifting what they've done for 30 years. And that misses 90% of the advantage of bringing in the utilization of data and the new analytic tools that are available, the new automation tools, RPA and AI and similar things. So that has to be the preliminary discussion. when you're moving toward those kinds of things. And then the second piece I've seen that I think is very interesting is when one talks about sort of the relationship between workforce and workplace. It makes a huge difference if your IT organization is indeed an enterprise organization, or mine sort of a hybrid semi-enterprise squelch and look, but mostly federated. We have 5 large agencies that completely do their own thing, and each of them has a larger workforce than my entire department. And then we have about 40 other agencies that either rely on us completely or have some mix of services that they do some things on their own and others with us. So to that point, we're getting into lots of different models of what is the relationship between workforce and workplace, because people have very different views that are rather parochial about looking only at their workforce rather than the state workforce generally. So I'm real interested in what you've seen in terms of dealing with organizations that have very different cultures that are attempting to meld the two and bring them to a solution that works for both parties.
Very good. Dr. Pettit, same question to you as you look at this triad, and you're bringing a perspective from 3 states, having been CIO for Oklahoma, CIO for Oregon, now Chief Technology Officer for Colorado. You look at this concept of these 3 dimensions and what we've talked about, particularly, what Libby and Brees discussed about, gosh, there was this immediate response, then there's sort of this medium-term response, the recovery, and then on to the long-term thrive. What are your perspectives on this?
I think that the recovery is going to be a very elongated process. I think that it's both the pivot. We've talked a lot about the pivot of the workforce for the IT workforce, for the states and the folks that are doing that. But it's also the pivot for the agencies, boards, and commissions who are having to make this pivot as well. So our target is moving while we're moving at the same time, which is a very difficult, a very challenging thing. So when we talk about workplace, it's not only our workplace, it's the delivery of the service to the citizen or client or customer or constituent that we're trying to deliver that to. And so it's actually what we would call a wicked problem in the social sciences, because it's got a lot of variables that compete with one another for priority. And so the other thing, I guess, talking about work, is that while we're certainly having, at least I'm certainly having, an enormously increase. I've seen an enormous increase in the number of one-on-one meetings I've had. I have and those meetings tend to be, I tend to be very, I ask more now about things that I see with folks that they're at home. You saw my mom walk by just a minute ago when we started there. And so it'll open a dialogue, a conversation on things. The meetings we have have a purpose, and so they're more project oriented. And so the work is the individual meetings are more project oriented, whereas our group meetings the focus used to be on the whiteboard or on some kind of a problem statement. I think now that dynamic has shifted, and I'm finding I get more done in individual meetings, but they tend to be more focused. I'm not sure if I need to change that to have or to encourage more casual interactions by having like office hours or things like we used to have in our college days with our professors or what have you. I think the last thing I want to bring up as far as work and the triad there is, instead of measuring it, historically we've measured things, performance or our IT, by transactions, by exchanges of money or exchanges of information or exchanges of something. It's now about a displacement of in-person interactions. It's really about, and that's really our wildly important goal. One of our wildly important goals for this next year in Colorado is how many in-person interactions that we can displace using a chatbot, using a online service, using an FAQ that's somehow, with an AI behind it that will bring that to them, be able to give them a status, transformation we've been talking about from pull to push, all of these things that we've been talking about for many years. And now the metric is, at least for us, how many interactions can I support rather than transactions? So that's a foundational shift it's a paradigm shift for how we view the problem, or how we view our interactions with citizenry.
Right. Julie, I'm going to ask you to bring up the results of our question number 1 for us to look at again, please. That question was, what do you see as the likelihood you will continue a virtual work environment? And you could see, 96% are anticipating this. So here's a question for you all. Let's start with Alex. How do you think COVID-19 has possibly accelerated changing what work we do and how we do it? Could we have gotten into this situation as quickly as we have, in terms of people working remote, but also leveraging some of the features and capabilities of cloud computing? And I guess another side of that is, it's a good thing cloud showed up when it did, right? I mean, if we hadn't had cloud capabilities, how would we have done this? So, was COVID sort of an accelerator?
Yeah, the short answer is yes, it definitely was. I think everyone would agree with that. That was certainly the direction we were going, but culturally, government has always been around a person's body in a chair, and so if your body's not in the chair, then you must be out on the golf course, you must be out doing something other than your job, because your job is associated with a desk and a location and a duty station. And many of these things in a lot of agencies and states are actually codified, that you are assigned a duty station, much like almost pseudo-military, where you're expected to be. That has changed. There's no doubt about that. I think the thing that is true is I don't know that we've quite worked through all the things we have to do on managing. It was mentioned earlier there about performance management and coaching and mentoring. I don't think we've really mastered that in this new environment, and whether that's working interactively with our folks, with the citizens and the people that come to us, that our ultimate customers are, if that's our agency partners and people, or even if that's our own internal teams. I don't know that we've quite gotten to the point where our tools may have outrun our skills.
Okay, very good. Mike, what's your perspective on this whole idea of the convergence of COVID, and then sort of a maturity in cloud? We've got a ways to go, as Bree brought up. With hybrid clouds, we've got some new kinds of operating discipline that have to come into place in order to manage this growing complexity. It used to be, are you going to go to cloud? Well, what do you mean by that? Cloud, of course. What do you mean by that? What kind of cloud? So what about this convergence that just happened here so fast, so quickly this year?
Well, I think there are two aspects of it that are very important. Alex has touched on one of them, but the first is, for at least the first 2 months, folks believed this is temporary. We're going to be back in the office. We're just going to make do and do the best we can with the challenges we're facing. But the other one that I think is really critical to this, and COVID is the linchpin, is historically I have not been favorably disposed to telework in the rule sets that the state of Maryland had. It's very complex. There are reports that have to go in multiple directions daily from the teleworker and their managers and their managers' managers. And so very few people took advantage of the opportunity to telework because it created 2 hours of work a day for them. What has occurred now that everyone is teleworking is we're actually looking at how do we make this practical rather than how do we live within the rules that somebody wrote 20 years ago? And to Alex's point, a lot of this is, the tools have outstriped our ability to use them, but people are incredibly innovative. And I suspect over the next 6 months, the biggest issue we're going to face is that the improprieties, if you will, things that aren't working well in communication are, as Libby said, the loss of being able to walk down the hall and grab somebody while you're talking to a third person.
Yeah.
And we have to start building tools to do things like that. With regard to the value of the cloud, we still do most everything on mainframes, but we have 2 huge programs in the state that are very quickly moving a number of citizen-facing services to the cloud. The first is the MD Think program, which within the next 2 years, we will have moved all of our health and welfare services to the cloud. And the other is my pet, the Maryland One Stop portal, that's handling everything else. And we are effectively creating an interface that citizens, no matter what they want to do with the state, will have the same simplistic interface to do everything, a single account, and control their personal data. Because as privacy and security become broader issues that the legislatures, not only in California and New York, but other states like Maryland are looking at, I think that is going to become a significant issue because of concerns people have about the cloud and what they're hearing about Facebook and Google and Amazon and all of the other folks that have business models based on data analytics about their customers. So those are the 2 aspects that I see. I mean, I see the cloud as a boon and as a challenge at the same time.
Now, something that occurred was we saw those states that had possibly a more mature operating discipline for cloud were able to ratchet up, whether it was unemployment insurance or any other services that were needed by citizens that lost their jobs. And that would be part of that convergence where the cloud capabilities bring with them this ability to respond better and faster, getting back to the respond on Libby and Bree's slide here, respond quickly to the citizens. We had 2 fronts for CIOs, and that was their own workforce, but also being able to provision agencies to be able to respond. So would you agree with that? Again, that cloud showed up in time for those that were fully exploiting it and its capabilities.
Well, I think the key there is, like you say, Eric, fully exploiting it. I mean, a lot of provisioning in the cloud is with infrastructure and not really writing cloud native applications. So simply moving something that's unable to take advantage of that doesn't, the app itself, if it's a digital immigrant, much like I am, it's not going to adapt as well as, say, a digital native. So a lot of applications simply were, but there were a lot of applications, of course, that were localized and had to be scaled up. But there were a lot of them that had been ported and simply hadn't been rewritten. And so that trick, that being a cloud native app, is, I think, the key to what you're talking about, Eric. It's not enough to just lift and shift, as Mike had said earlier. It's really about, have you redone or rebuilt your application to take advantage of those.
Kind of a lean attitude. We say apply lean first, then innovate in a major way. Mike, any response to that yourself?
Sure, just very quickly, scalability of digital apps is one of their principal advantages. And I suspect the other one that Alex didn't mention is that you can modularize things and use pieces of various applications. So for example, we built our own contact tracing application, principally because the vendors that we talked to about building it said it was, an 8-month process, and we built it ourselves in 6 weeks using modules from the one-stop process that we've already put in place.
Very good. I want to move to another question here. Julie, would you bring up question 2, please? This is something that Alex had brought up when we had previous meetings, this concept of, there's some new things that are happening in terms of managing and leading. So here we have this question: do you have a strategy in place for enabling effective teams in this remote situation? And 82% are saying definitely we do, and 14% we're working on the challenges now, 5% we're not. Now these results would say we're in pretty good shape. So let's bring us back to that triad slide, Julie. So as we look at this idea, I want to go to you first, Dr. Pettit, because you're the one that brought this idea up in our early discussions. What are you doing to maintain those important working relationships and in embedding the concepts of leadership? You've already talked about maybe there's some different kind of meetings I need to hold, maybe some more one-on-ones where maybe we talk about something different. But what sort of ideas have you got so far, or what do you think we should be exploring here? And maybe there's, in fact, on the part of experts like Bree and Libby, maybe there's going to be some new innovative ways to, in fact, embed leadership and then get those contacts and relationships that we used to have in the hallway. We'd be able to talk to somebody at the coffee counter, that kind of thing. So, Alex, what are your thoughts on that going forward?
Well, I think in the short run, one of the things that I've done is we just recently completed a 360 review for my directors, so that they not only had the opportunity to know what I think about them, which I'd like to think is important, but more importantly, what everyone else thinks about them. I think that building your emotional IQ is going to be extraordinarily important in this virtual world, where you would almost not think that it would be as significant, but I think it's even more significant now that we're unable to have that in-person tele kind of interaction with people.
Yeah.
And that you can't get that sense of what they're about or who they are or whatever. You're really, one of my jokes I like to tell is when I was a child, I used to have an imaginary friend, and then when I grew up, I learned that all my friends were imaginary, and now I've come to learn that everybody I work with is imaginary. So, as we do that, it's extraordinarily important that you maintain those and you understand how you're being perceived. The things that you used to be able to do and interact with and be able to gesticulate or whatever, they're not quite the same. They don't come across the same way as when you're on camera. And so that's number one, is a 360. I've done that with my folks. The second thing is I have to more actively solicit their feedback and understand better and be very careful as I listen to folks as I'm trying to give them coaching and mentoring and encouragement and whatever. It's not about just going to the more traditional project management performance, PMP stuff of saying, well, you got this milestone, how are you coming to that? It's on this date, blah, blah, blah. I think a lot of things we've moved back towards and perhaps it's out of fear, but we moved back to more traditional methods of management. And I would offer that the pivot needs to be to a more personal kind of management. And I can say that without really knowing what I'm talking about yet. So I'm working through that myself to a great degree with my own team here, of trying to make those contacts with folks. And having only been in Colorado for 6 months, it's even more challenging. Have that backstory with people and that to build upon. And then I guess the last thing is really trying to inspire people more than just the work that's being done, more than just the mission that we're fulfilling, but really it's really trying to get to folks to understand better and to get what it is that they can feel connected to and inspired by the workforce around them and the work that they're doing. And this is I think this is probably my single greatest challenge. So to the 96% that had this figured out, it's alex.pettit@state.co.us. Send me those. I want to see it.
Now,
I'm still
Alex,
working through this.
that last part of what you were telling me or telling us about, it really fits in with Teresa's vision. You know, the playbook. You know, the goals she's trying to set for people. You know, she's really trying to work on that. You know, what are you passionate about? And what do you really want to do? And we're going
Yes,
to come back to
absolutely.
that in a second. But Mike, I want to get your response as well. You know, how are you trying to get that connection in this
Sure.
remote world?
Well, let me start with, I have to, be a truth teller about my answer. I'm one of that 82% that said I have a strategy, and I do have a strategy. I know it's not the right strategy because this is going to be an iterative process and we're going to learn along the way. But like so many things in life, I am passionate about the principles that I am standing for.
Yeah.
And when I'm given new facts that change my principles, I'm just as passionate about my new principles.
Yeah.
And I think people have to approach this. Alex, you said it in a slightly different way, but with a sense of humor, and recognize that something they may view as a failure isn't really a failure because it's an amazing learning experience. I have undertaken that since I took this role on, that there's no such thing as failure except making the same mistake multiple times or giving up without searching out something to learn from a process.
Yeah.
And so I think the other point of this that's critical is, as Alex said, we don't have the same impression looking at each other through these cameras. I mean, I remember reading, millennia ago that 80% of the communication is through body language.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we are doing more and more with email and more with SMS or text messages and more on meetings like this, there are things that are going to be lost in the communication.
Mm-hmm.
And figuring out how we can shortcut those losses and again, apologize to each other and be graceful for the fact that our methodologies aren't as good as we'd like them to be is going to be the key to progressing faster in this new normal.
Right. We're all going to have to be very forgiving about the imperfections in this virtual world and very understanding.
We have to laugh at ourselves.
And humor. Absolutely. This is very important to all of us. Just our physical, mental health is keeping the humor there. Now I've got another thing I want to go back to that we all talked about last week or so, and that was, we got all these dynamics moved into this remote work situation. We're struggling in some cases with the capabilities. We're dealing with this, cameras and whatever. The other part of it is, as we're moving into the future, the makeup of the organizational chart. And I think Dr. Pettit might have said, there may not be an organizational chart. So the idea is, as we move forward, kind of sort of the gig economy, but not quite. It's going to be sort of the CIO as broker, not only acquiring services for agencies, mapping the demand and the capabilities, but that extends then into human skills, people skills, workforce as needed to build that portfolio I need right now. And those people aren't going to be permanent state employees. Now, there's a couple of dynamics that concern me a little bit about that, and I want to get your perspectives on this as well. As now, when we move to this world where we're trading in and trading out skilled workers, we lose this personality. We lose this ownership of our organization and our jobs. We have these very dedicated state employees who are here on mission, and they are serving their country, they're serving their states, and they're going to be open to some of this experimenting with ideas because they're always after these outcomes. Now we change that dynamic and we're merely hiring help, you know, and part of the issue is the salaries. You know, we talk about we hire state employees at a 40% discount. You know, they're not being paid market. And now we've got people from a variety of backgrounds and motivations just to do a task. You know, getting back to that project, Alex, that we got a project and we got a project item we need delivered. We're going to acquire those capabilities in the workforce, in the workplace, and get that done. And then they're gone. They don't have to live with whatever, you know, they created. But Alex, when you think about that, what does the future look like, and how do we manage this world of not as many state employees, more contractors? How do we keep them going in the direction we want, so we're getting those citizen outcomes we're after in the first place?
Well, I think most of us are in this. I say most of us. I can't imagine anybody's in this to make money, you know. So we're in it for the mission. We're in it for the contribution, the service, and what have you. And really and to that point, so a lot of the I can't think of anything that we're doing, particularly in applications development, that's not program oriented. You know, whether it's the CHIPS program or youth services program or Medicaid program or WIC program. And I think there's going to be some degree of bifurcation that you'll see, or you know, a split here from the things that are done specific to a program or an assignment or something that's going to happen. And then, you know, for a project, like you're talking about, a project orientation to deliver something, but then overarching the product owner, to kind of get into my agile a little bit, that the emphasis on project owner and ownership of that, and where that's going to reside and how that's going to be managed, and how these are going to be you know, how that's going to interact with the Scrum teams and the delivery from the sprints and things like this. I think that's going to become, you're going to see a shift out of just the application development, and that ultimately the piece that I think that has to be addressed isn't going to be the delivery of the application or the product. It's going to be the sustainment of the program. And I think we're starting to see that kind of a pivot occur. At least I am in Colorado, where the emphasis, it's no longer, you know, our systems development lifecycle, like a lot of them, focus on the delivery of an application, you know, on the delivery of a solution or a project or something like that. And it's very project oriented. And now we're starting to pivot towards sustainment of a program. And how is that going to translate in this new brave new world of ours here? And I don't have the answer quite yet. It's an interesting. I'd like to hear what Mike has to say and what others see about that. You know.
Yeah, Mike, same question. You know, what's your response?
Well, gee, Eric, we don't have enough time. You know far more about me than most folks, but just as background very quickly, I have spent most of my career in the private sector, but every decade I've taken 2 years out, except this last time because the governor asked me to stay longer, and done public service, and then gone back to my life in the private sector. And I think that is an amazingly valuable model for me and for people that have a desire to serve in the public, but also want to imbue new ideas and different ways of thinking about things into bureaucracy that typically the folks that have gotten used to doing things a particular way don't see. So I am a huge advocate, and in fact, the way I have attempted to attract youngsters to the state of Maryland is I'll tell them, come work for me for 2 years. I guarantee you in your first year, you will have far more real responsibility than you would have in a private entity. And when you leave in 2 years, you'll know more about how government works than most of the managers in the private organizations you're joining. And that will be of immense value to you, both in understanding private and public politics and how to deal to government and with government, both as a citizen and as a vendor. And as Alex said, I think the focus now, at least in our efforts here in Maryland, is to make certain that our goals are programmatic and that the owner of a particular business has continuity and, to go all agile on you, and that the release train engineers are people that are versed in the program goals beyond the particular project or the particular scrum, and that ultimately the folks that make a career of government get the opportunity to work both in the governance and the operational side, so that, again, to Alex's point, the programmatic themes become primary and become the focus of their efforts.
Right. Very good. Yeah, this is a new world that we are in for sure. Now, as we look at how things are evolving, I've got a question for Libby and Bree, and that is, in your specialties relative to workforce, in fact, in your communities, in your associations with others that are working in HR, is there developing discipline? Is there developing reference work that speaks to this new world? And how do we manage a workforce that is a mix, not a mix of generations, a mix of private sector, people who are full-time government employees? Is there thought leadership that's going on in your community?
Yeah, so absolutely. And I think it's interesting because both Alex and Mike hit on a lot of those key themes. But some of the leading concepts and realities are that people are not staying in jobs for 5, 10, 15 years, right? They are feeling after even 6 months that they have done their duty and they have the potential to move on if something else comes along. So I think Mike's sales pitch is a great one, and because it's playing to the realities of we will see people transition. The mission, first and foremost, we're seeing that people want that mission focus, whether it's through social impact, even on commercial side, as well as with government agencies. That is a key theme, that the more that you can resonate with your workforce on that, the better it will be. And then I would say the third one is really, just the ability to develop and that connection with their managers. And so I think that's one that's interesting. If I take it back to, the telework strategy and feeling comfortable, which I am glad to hear there's a strategy and people feel like they have them, but how are we maintaining those growth opportunities, the connection with individuals next line up, kind of those managers, because that's actually also one of those key facets that's going to keep them in the workforce and keep them productive and engaged. So certainly we have lots more that we can share, but I think those are some of the key themes. Bree, I don't know if there's anything you want to hit.
Yeah, I was just going to add, the enduring thing that keeps folks engaged is purpose. Purpose in work is super important. And if you are, seeing any trends in IT supervisors, it's typically that they're needing those soft skills. They're needing the way to connect with new talent and provide those opportunities and sort of champion career development for younger folks. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly something I would underscore.
And we're going to have to learn how to do it with these cameras. So I want to thank all of you very much for participating in this webinar. I think you're all so wonderful. I want to thank our audience, Julie Ellis, for keeping us on track here. Again, back to Ron Baldwin, whose brilliant ideas keep coming across, and he was spearheading this whole idea. Here is the contact information for all of our great panelists. We want you to stay in touch with NASCIO. We're publishing stuff all the time, and there's ways to stay in connection with NASCIO through a variety of means. Thank you, panelists. I look forward to doing things like this with you again in future. And we'll close this call. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone. Goodbye.